Welcome to the Tim Booker channel, where wisdom is worth sharing. I wish you an enjoyable time listening to books. Today, the book I'm going to discuss with you is titled The Wisdom of Life. This book is approximately 180,000 words long, and I will share with you the three most interesting questions from the book. 1. Why is the path to happiness found in relinquishing desires? 2. How do the wise approach wealth differently from the poor and the rich? 3. Why is the joy of solitude far superior to the joy of social gatherings? The Wisdom of Life is a book that everyone should seriously contemplate and savor, especially young people, who would benefit from reading it. For instance, when you've just graduated from college, reading this book may help you gain a deeper and more genuine understanding of what happiness is and how to attain it. Young adults leaving school to embark on independent lives often face three challenges. 1. The dilemma of choice. 2. The disparity between reality and ideals. 3. The difficulty in adapting to the mundane but genuine social rules. In simple terms, these challenges involve making difficult choices related to employment, emotions, relationships, personal pursuits, and self-worth, and then dealing with the consequences of those choices. It can be said that no one can perfectly navigate all of these challenges. So, what can be done? In addition to diligence, effort, patience, and waiting, we all need a life reference book. The book I'm discussing today, The Wisdom of Life, is such a valuable life reference. Before delving into the book, let's first learn a bit about the author of this book, Arthur Schopenhauer, and his relationship with other philosophical masters. Understanding Schopenhauer's background is essential to comprehending his work. Schopenhauer was one of the greatest philosophers in Europe during the first half of the 19th century. Many people may not have heard of Schopenhauer, but there's another philosopher from his time whom you've probably heard of, and that's Hegel. Schopenhauer and Hegel actually taught at the same university, but Schopenhauer held a low opinion of Hegel's philosophy, describing him as someone who used flashy but empty language, and he even called him a charlatan among philosophy teachers. Is there anyone whom Schopenhauer admired? Yes, he considered Voltaire, Rousseau, and Kant as his spiritual mentors. He frequently quoted the ideas and viewpoints of these three philosophers in his own writings. Schopenhauer also had a student with greater fame than his own, and that was Nietzsche. Nietzsche always saw himself as Schopenhauer's most loyal student, breathing fresh air into every word of Schopenhauer's writings, making them feel refreshing. The essence of Schopenhauer's philosophy was also inherited by another notable figure, the psychology master, Freud. Freud's psychoanalytic theory regarding the ID is rooted in Schopenhauer's philosophical system. Schopenhauer's ideas also influenced many literary and artistic masters in later generations, such as Tolstoy and Turgenev from Russia, Thomas Hardy from England, Maupassant and Zola from France, and Wagner from Germany. You can find traces of Schopenhauer's thought in the works of these individuals. In 2009, a highly popular book titled The Power of Now, by Eckhart Tolle was published. This book provides practical guidance for people dealing with anxiety, depression, and high levels of stress, helping them recognize the illusion of time and live in the present moment to find true strength. The Power of Now is, in fact, a detailed explanation of how to view the past, present, and future, which is found in Schopenhauer's The Wisdom of Life. Schopenhauer didn't produce an extensive body of work during his lifetime, but his most famous work is titled The World as Will and Representation. He completed the first draft of this book when he was only 30 years old in 1818. At the age of 30, he laid the foundation for his philosophical ideas. After that, the latter half of Schopenhauer's life was mainly devoted to writing supplements and additions to this book, known as supplement and additions. The Wisdom of Life that I'm discussing today is a section extracted from these supplements and additions. Now, let's delve into the three most interesting viewpoints from The Wisdom of Life by Schopenhauer, or we could say, the three unconventional viewpoints of Schopenhauer. 1. Firstly, a wise life is not about pursuing happiness but about reducing suffering and abandoning desires in order to achieve happiness. 2. Secondly, life's pursuit should not be wealth but wisdom. 3. Lastly, finding joy in solitude and being content with oneself is the source of happiness. Let's start with the first viewpoint. A wise life is not about pursuing happiness but about reducing suffering. When most people contemplate their life goals, they often say, I will consider my life well lived if I can provide a happy and comfortable life for myself and my family. I will achieve my goals through hard work, diligence, enduring temporary suffering for future satisfaction. However, Schopenhauer held a different perspective. He believed that the primary task of a wise life was to understand a fundamental concept, that rational living should not seek happiness and joy but strive to minimize pain and suffering. This idea embodies the truth that all happiness is illusory, while only suffering is real. Let me provide an example to explain further. Suppose we are in excellent health and well-being, experiencing no significant issues. But last week, we injured our foot while running, and now, every step we take is excruciatingly painful. For several days, we can't even leave our home, as our focus is entirely on that agonizing foot. This minor injury might even disrupt essential work or appointments. The point is, this small yet genuine pain causes discomfort in our minds. However, if there were no foot injury and our days were uneventful, we still couldn't describe ourselves as happy. So, the injured foot represents a real, albeit minor, suffering. But in the absence of such suffering, it doesn't equate to the happiness we typically understand. Schopenhauer believed that true happiness lies in days with minimal suffering and trouble. He advised against fixating on seeking and enjoying the pleasures and joys of life but instead being cautious about avoiding the countless misfortunes that life can bring. At this point, you might find Schopenhauer's viewpoint somewhat pessimistic. After all, we believe that we must work hard to attain the things we desire. For example, if we don't perform well at work this month, our bonuses will be affected, and our income will decrease. How can we enjoy life then? This is a very common belief. To understand Schopenhauer's perspective and how it differs from our common understanding, we need to delve into the philosophical foundations of his thinking. Schopenhauer believed that the source of human suffering lay in our desires. As long as desires exist, suffering is inevitable. For example, a newborn baby, as long as it has food, sleep, warmth, and a mother's care, is content. This is because infants have very few desires compared to adults. Schopenhauer argued that the level of suffering a person experiences is directly proportional to the depth of their will to live. The stronger the will to live, the greater the suffering. The only way to escape suffering is to renounce desires and stop wanting anything. Of course, wanting nothing at all is also impossible. Schopenhauer also provided guidance on how to think and act in the face of the concrete realities of life. It involves adjusting several attitudes, including how one perceives themselves and others. First, individuals should recognize the overall trajectory of their life and have a general plan. For instance, a worker participating in the construction of a building may not know the entire architectural plan, but they understand their role and the specific tasks they need to perform. They recognize how their work contributes to the larger picture. By understanding the broader context, they can work diligently, aware of their specific tasks and the building's overall purpose. Schopenhauer stressed that individuals should recognize their most significant desires and have a general understanding of the profession they should pursue, the roles they should play, and their relationship with the world. This means that while we should work diligently, we should also occasionally lift our heads to view our distant goals. This ensures that our efforts lead us directly toward our objectives. Otherwise, we might find ourselves toiling away, only to realize that we've taken a long and winding path, too late to avoid regret. Another aspect of viewing oneself involves living in the present. Schopenhauer recommended forgetting the past, focusing on the present, and planning for the future in a way that balances these three aspects, ensuring they don't interfere with each other. For example, some people only work hard, and after a long journey, they suddenly realize they've been on the wrong path. They experience immense suffering and may even change their attitudes toward people and events, even when their initial perspective was accurate. On the other hand, some people constantly worry about potential future disasters, such as whether housing prices will fall, whether they should sell their house, or how to manage their assets in the event of an economic crisis or a family member's illness. Continuously thinking about these potential calamities can make daily life far from peaceful. Schopenhauer suggested that uncertainties or potential disasters that may or may not occur in the future can be treated as if they will never happen. Fretting about these unconfirmed future misfortunes only exchanges future worries for current suffering. Schopenhauer believed the best approach was to embrace the present moment, consciously savor every trouble-free and painless instant. To step out of the book for a moment and provide a real-world perspective, people often reflect on past failures to avoid repeating mistakes. Planning for the future can help us prepare for possible calamities. Philosophy itself is a matter of subjective consciousness, so Schopenhauer's advice requires both acceptance and moderation. So, in summary, the method of pursuing happiness in life is to minimize suffering. To reduce suffering, we should avoid dwelling on past pain and future anxieties, and instead, fully enjoy the peace of the present moment. When interacting with others, we must accept their individuality, tolerate their shortcomings, and seek common interests and friendly cooperation. This concludes the first viewpoint from The Wisdom of Life. Now let's discuss the second viewpoint. In life, the pursuit should not be wealth but wisdom. Many people believe that as long as they acquire wealth and money, they can buy almost everything. Material satisfaction and tangible pleasures are often equated with happiness. While we are aware that money can't solve everything, many people spend their days working hard, primarily with the goal of attaining financial freedom. This is a very realistic pursuit. Schopenhauer, however, suggested that in the pursuit of wealth, there should be a rational limit. The satisfaction of wealth desires is not determined by the absolute quantity of wealth but rather by the relative amount. Relative quantity, as I understand it, means an amount that is reasonable and sufficient. If you, in your rational judgment, find it adequate, that should be enough because those who are irrational in their pursuit of wealth will never find a stopping point. Wealth is akin to salty seawater. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. Schopenhauer argued that humans are inherently desiring beings, and the most direct way to satisfy these desires is by pursuing wealth. Another path to desire satisfaction is through social status and reputation, which can only be achieved with wealth. However, desires are insatiable, and the pursuit of wealth is unending. People who accumulate vast wealth without using it wisely are often ensnared by their riches. We've all heard the story of The Fisherman and the Golden Fish, which involves three characters: the golden fish, who can be considered a benevolent god, capable of providing happiness and joy by fulfilling people's material needs; the fisherman, who is content with little, finding happiness in obtaining a beautiful house without much effort; and his wife, the insatiable old woman who always believes she should receive more. Her desires continually expand, much like drinking seawater. The more she consumes, the thirstier she becomes. As a result, the story concludes with all the wealth turning into a mirage, leading back to suffering. In The Wisdom of Life, Schopenhauer roughly categorizes people into the poor and the rich and discusses how they should perceive wealth. First, let's talk about how the poor should wisely handle wealth. It's entirely natural for people to love wealth and money. Pursuing wealth sensibly is entirely justified. However, Schopenhauer disdained those who, once they've earned money, pursue indulgence without regard for the future. He advised people to regard their existing wealth as a safeguard against unforeseen events. In other words, you should set aside enough for a rainy day. Spending lavishly and living beyond your means is a risky strategy, as it can lead to major setbacks that you cannot manage. The suffering of lacking money is more immediate and real than the suffering of having too much. Schopenhauer strongly recommended saving money. If possible, he believed that individuals should set aside at least 1/8 of their earnings to prepare for future needs. Now, how should the rich perceive wealth? Schopenhauer's perspective is as follows: for those whose wealth provides a worry-free life, such as successful entrepreneurs or those born into enormous wealth, if they possess advanced intellectual and moral qualities, then wealth and these qualities are like a double boon bestowed by heaven. These advanced qualities involve knowing how to use wealth to create more significant societal value rather than using it solely for personal pleasure and consumption. These individuals can accomplish things that others cannot, making it possible to generate wealth with greater societal significance. For example, they can utilize the resources at their disposal to support and drive progress in certain fields. They can also engage in philanthropic activities, providing assistance to those in need, regardless of nationality or ethnicity. On the other hand, if someone has substantial wealth but fails to use it effectively for societal benefit, they won't experience happiness. This is because having relieved themselves of poverty, wealth merely ushers them into another realm of suffering, boredom. If the predicament of poverty provides individuals with something to do, the curse of having more than they need often leads to extravagance and profligacy. To put it succinctly, they have nothing but money left. These are the key points from The Wisdom of Life regarding how to perceive wealth, both from the perspective of the poor and the rich. Alright, having discussed the wisdom of approaching wealth, let's move on to the third viewpoint of this book, finding happiness through solitude and contentment. We typically view humans as social animals who gain resources through cooperation and derive the value of happiness from sharing it with others. The saying, "happiness shared is happiness doubled," reflects this perspective. However, Schopenhauer presents a radically different view on the experience of happiness. In pursuit of happiness, many people enjoy gatherings, dining, and traveling in the company of others. But Schopenhauer believed that as soon as people enter social situations, they unconsciously put aside most of their true selves to please others, making genuine happiness unattainable. Here, it's essential to interject that when Schopenhauer refers to the self, he means a rational concept. Achieving the self means satisfying one's desires through rational methods. We previously mentioned that Freud's concept of the ID originated from Schopenhauer. The ID refers to the self filled with various desires. Now, returning to the topic at hand, Schopenhauer argues that living in social gatherings necessitates mutual concessions and tolerances. Therefore, the larger the social event, the more likely it is to become monotonous and tedious. As more people join a social gathering, its essence becomes increasingly banal. Schopenhauer's perspective is based on his real-life observations. To illustrate, consider a story about Schopenhauer himself. He lived to be 72 years old, with his final 20-plus years spent in Frankfurt. There was a restaurant there known as the English Inn, frequented by local English gentlemen. Schopenhauer was also a regular customer. For a period, before every meal, Schopenhauer would place a gold coin on the table. When leaving the restaurant, he would pocket the coin. One day, a server asked him why he always put down and then picked up the gold coin. Schopenhauer replied, "If one day I hear these Englishmen discussing a topic more serious than women, horses, and dogs, I'll give this coin to a poor person outside." It is evident how much he disdained mundane social activities. Schopenhauer believed that true happiness could only be found when one is alone, in solitude. People who do not appreciate solitude do not appreciate freedom, because true freedom is only achieved when a person is by themselves. It is in solitude that one can express their personality, talents, and enjoy the finer things in life without constraint. This is genuine freedom, and such an experience is authentic happiness. Abandoning social gatherings in favor of solitude is the wisest choice. Schopenhauer stated, "To feel within oneself complete, real, and profound peace and contentment, this is the second greatest source of happiness, and it is close to health in importance." The first lesson in the school of wisdom is to learn to endure loneliness, because solitude is the source of happiness and tranquility. Inversely, as one has more within themselves, they require less from others. How should we interpret this? Let's consider a musical instrument as an analogy. In Russia, there is a type of musical instrument made from cow horns, and each horn can produce only a single note. To create beautiful music, you need to gather the required horns. Just like the spirits of ordinary people, which are dull and monotonous, much like those single-note horns, they only become meaningful when brought together. However, a person with a rich intellectual mind is like a piano. A piano can produce complete music on its own and doesn't need to attend a gathering of other instruments. Even if it does, the piano will still be the star of the show, serving as the main melody. We can imagine the piano as a highly talented individual attending a gathering. In social gatherings, if the piano has to accommodate other instruments and cannot use all 88 keys, it will undoubtedly be unhappy. After discussing the three viewpoints mentioned above, you may find Schopenhauer's philosophical ideas, when measured against today's values, to be both pessimistic and negative. Indeed, many criticize Schopenhauer's pessimistic philosophy as negative and outdated, viewing his perspective on a suffering life as the opposite of our desires for happiness and joy. However, those who support Schopenhauer argue that his thoughts are not baseless fantasies but rather grounded in reality. When Schopenhauer traveled across Europe in his time, he witnessed the devastation and immense suffering brought about by the conflicts between France, Austria, Russia, and Prussia. Years of war and subsequent economic downturns in various countries fostered his extreme pessimism. This is the origin of his pessimistic philosophy. Now, we find ourselves in a globalized world, where the clash of various cultural and intellectual ideas has enriched our knowledge and broadened our perspectives. However, as we see farther, our desires multiply, and many of these desires seem unattainable, leading to increased suffering. Thus, Schopenhauer's philosophy of a pessimistic life holds positive relevance for our current society and ourselves. Next, I'll attempt to provide a positive interpretation of the three somewhat negative viewpoints discussed today. First, a life of wisdom is not about pursuing happiness but avoiding suffering. I understand this as a reminder not to make unnecessary mistakes in life, particularly severe errors against our principles. If we have the wisdom to avoid low-level mistakes that require no learning, we spare ourselves needless troubles. It's like a game of ping-pong, where ensuring we don't make mistakes and waiting for the opponent to err is a key strategy for winning. Secondly, concerning the wise management of wealth, we can refer to the explanation of the American historian and author of world history, Will Durant. Durant stated that a life dedicated to amassing wealth is without value unless we know how to turn that wealth into happiness. This is an art that requires education and wisdom. Sensory pursuits do not provide lasting satisfaction. Thus, one must understand the purpose of life, just as one understands the art of wealth creation. To illustrate this point, there is a story about the founding of Stanford University. Leland Stanford and his wife, who were wealthy, faced profound grief after the sudden loss of their only son. They found solace by giving their wealth a meaningful purpose. They used the majority of their fortune to establish a university that would provide higher education opportunities to many young people, particularly those from less privileged backgrounds. After Mr. Stanford's passing, his wife kept only enough for her basic expenses and donated the rest to Stanford University. The Stanfords' wise handling of their wealth helped them find inner satisfaction and happiness, compensating for their lifelong regrets. Lastly, the notion of enjoying solitude and finding one's own joy for experiencing advanced happiness is not about isolating oneself from society. It involves enriching our minds through direct life experiences and indirect learning. In the words of Lo Chinyu, it means that people should continuously restore themselves. When your personal energy level reaches a certain height, you will unconsciously gravitate toward social circles that offer nourishment and resources. Most social interactions might seem uninteresting, and you might avoid them, but those that can enrich you will naturally attract you. To recap and summarize today's main points, we've gained a general understanding of the relatively unknown philosopher Schopenhauer, who stood between two waves of great thinkers in European philosophical history. His ideas have deeply influenced literature, philosophy, psychology, artistic creation, and more in later generations. We've also explored three unique viewpoints from The Wisdom of Life. 1. Life inherently contains suffering, and we should avoid inappropriate desires to minimize our troubles. 2. The primary purpose of life isn't wealth but the wise management of it. 3. Enjoying solitude and finding personal contentment is the source of advanced happiness. Finally, we've analyzed how to view Schopenhauer's pessimistic philosophy from both positive and negative perspectives, focusing on the importance of minimizing mistakes, understanding the art of wealth, and continuous self-improvement. This concludes our discussion. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share with your family and friends. Wisdom is worth spreading, opening the door to a brighter future. Thank you, and goodbye.